Thanks for joining us. I'm Eric Johnson. I'm Executive Director for the Association of Counties. Thank you, Commissioner Blair. I'll tell you, he almost landed this airplane at the end of the runway. He had 15 minutes to get through all the activities, and he did it in 14 minutes. So nice job, Commissioner Brady. Commissioner Cooney, thank you very much, and great for the video. What's fascinating about that video is if you've ever been to a NACO conference, a WIR conference, we're doing a lot of pre-trip planning right now, and pre-conference planning. What's going to happen in kind of the pre-conference tours. And those pre-conference tours, nothing that you saw up there associated with our pre-conference tours, because we're going to be taking you to exciting things like wastewater treatment plants. Yeah. Agriculture and water sites and timber and all sorts of good locations where are the types of things that you have to govern and deal with every day. And so please join us for the pre-conference activities as well as at the conference. So it's a great city to be, and we go there often. So we're going to talk about civility, and I'm going to introduce our panel in just a moment. But I want to give you a little bit of background to that. George Washington, at the age of 16, wrote the rules of civility and decent behavior in company and conversation at the age of 16. And he is oftentimes referred to, as the father of this country, looked up to as the most respected president ever in our nation. And he wrote this: "Let your conversation be without malice or envy, for it is a sign of a tractable and commendable nature. And in all causes of passion admit reason to govern." 16 years old. A long, long time ago. Think about that. In the Civility in America, a nationwide survey conducted in the last couple of years, 95% of Americans believe we have a civility problem in America. 81% think uncivil behavior is leading to an increase in violence. 80% agree that the level of civility will not improve until our government leaders act more civilly. 71% believe civility is worse compared to a few years ago, and 70% think that incivility has risen to crisis levels. Now, whether or not this is true or not, those are the perceptions of our fellow citizens. And that's nationally. I don't know what that looks like here just in Washington State. So let me introduce to you our panelists. Our panelists range from a variety of folks. The first person is Desiree Finch. Desiree is right here. Raise your hand, Desiree. Was born and raised in Chicago, Illinois. As a graduate of the Ohio State University. The Ohio State, did I say that correctly?
The Ohio
State. Did I say that
absolutely.
correctly? Yeah, no arrogance from that location whatsoever. Yeah. Desiree holds a master's in leadership with an emphasis in marriage and family therapy from Seattle University. Desiree is the Pierce County Manager for the grassroots organization Fuse, where she works to become a strong ally with underrepresented communities in Pierce County. Thanks for joining us, Desiree. David Ammons.
Thank you.
This is really fun for me to introduce Dave Ammons. I've read many things over the years that he has written. He retired in 2017 after a long career in journalism and state government. He was political writer and columnist for the Associated Press for 38 years, hosted Inside Olympia on TVW. For those of you that are junkies of government, TVW television of Washington here is still on, and Austin Jenkins now does it, but David was really kind of instrumental in that program. He served as communication directors and senior policy advisor to the Office of Secretary of State, both Secretary Wyman and Secretary Reed. He writes, lectures, and does public speaking and advocates for civics, civility, and civic engagement. He's now on the Public Disclosure Commission, so any of you that are elected officials, you might want to go like this right now because they are.
I know where you live.
Yeah, where you live. So he's been involved in a number of activities, including the Washington State Parks Foundation, trustee on the Washington State Historical Society, and president of the Area Mental Health Board. He's a leader in the Presbyterian Church, journalism, political science graduate of the University of Washington as well. He has 2 adult children and lives in Olympia. So David, thank you for joining us. Our next speaker is someone we're getting our money out of this week. Brian Namey is with the National Association of Counties. Joined that staff in 2014 as the Director of Media Relations and currently serves as the Director of Public Affairs. He is responsible for NACO's digital communications, membership, county news, graphic design, media relations, conferences, and leadership development. Prior to joining NACO, he was Communication Director at the National Network to End Domestic Violence and a communications advisor for the nonprofit and private sector efforts to end domestic and sexual violence. He began his career at the Democratic Governors Association, where he served as press secretary. So please welcome Brian Namey. The reason I indicated we're getting our monies out with him, I think, Dave, I'm pretty sure that Brian has sessions that started at 8:30. It's pretty much all day we have him speaking at a session. So thank you very much. I already messaged the executive director with a picture saying we're getting our money out of Brian today. So thank you, Brian, for joining us. In the real Washington, I might add. Thank you very much. Next, and will be sitting next to me here is Helen Price Johnson, an Island County Commissioner. She's the past president of the Washington State Association of Counties. She grew up on Whidbey Island, graduating from Langley High School. There was not a year mentioned here, but graduated from Langley High School. Easy to guess. And then earned a degree from Mills College in Administration and Legal Processes. She is third-generation small business owner on the island, twice elected board member of the South Whidbey School District, worked hard to improve our children's educational opportunities. And in 2008, Helen made history by becoming the first woman elected to the Board of Island County Commissioners. So please join me in welcoming Mr. Price Johnson. So my first question, we're just going to kind of maybe work our way down the panel. Maybe we'll work in reverse. We'll go to Dave Ammons first. What does civility look like to you? And then a little bit more about, and why is civility even important, or have we really just blown it out of proportion?
Well, I have been very much engaged in civility and civic education and engagement of people with their government for my entire career. I think it's foundational to our ability to get along and to really look at issues rather than personalities. So I definitely think it's something that we all need to be concerned with. I tend to agree with the numbers that you read off, Eric. The public is distraught, I think, with the incivility of campaigns, elections, governance. I would say at the federal level, I am not seeing the same level in Olympia or around the state, and I have met many of you out in your counties, and I know that they're your problem solvers and not at each other's throats or trying to be right all the time. So I read recently and that a piece that says civility isn't just about talking nicely. In a healthy democracy, as in any healthy relationship, people need to hear and be heard by each other. In today's rough and tumble, winner-take-all style of politics, there is little listening. Opponents are demonized as evil enemies to be conquered rather than colleagues with whom critical issues of public policy need to be solved. The result is the gridlock we see in Washington, the other Washington, and the polarization we see all around us. I know David Brooks, who's a favorite writer of mine in the New York Times, recently wrote a piece where he was quoting a massive new study that says a lot of the hullabaloo has been generated by 10% on the far right and on the far left, and mostly, he said, financed by white male billionaires. And he said the rest of us are the exhausted majority. And I thought that was really good because our ears are assaulted with things that are said that are not true, demonstrably not true, with savage campaigns. Not so much, again, in our state. Somewhere over the top, there were some dirty tricks played this cycle, but I think our brand of sort of Scandinavian nice kind of goes against that sense of impoliteness a little more than the rest of the country, I would say, having covered politics for most of my adult life. One final thought, as we are looking at being upset by where we're at and perhaps discouraged, exhausted. I read another column this week, actually, by the African-American writer Charles Blow in the New York Times. He said, for him, the recurring theme for those who are discouraged and distraught are, 1, never lose hope in the ultimate victory of righteousness. 2, focus your fire on things you are most able to change. And 3, realize that change is neither quick nor permanent. The struggle for goodness and decency is an eternal struggle, not a seasonal one. He says, don't beat yourself up if you need to tune out every now and then and take a mental health break. There's no shame in it. This is a forever fight. Once you have recharged, reapply your armor and rejoin the fight with even more vigor. And I would add civility.
Thanks, Dave. Desiree, what about you? What's your perspective on civility, what it means to you or to your organization? And, why is it important, and is it really being blown out of proportion right now, your perspective?
First of all, my heart is about to jump right out of my chest. I'm an organizer, so I prefer to stay kind of running your campaigns and not sitting up here telling you about civility. So have some grace for me today. For me, civility is I think is kind of a personal thing, right? Like it's a part of a transformational process. It's about shared values and the things that we all hold and believe to be true, those things that we share. And it's our job as advocates and organizers to create spaces where we're having those conversations, where we can kind of get out of that polarized, well, what about this? And I believe pro-choice, and what about pro-life? And there's this whole world in the middle, right, that we just kind of ignore. And we come to the conversation with these assumptions that there's these deep-rooted differences and deep-rooted things that we just completely disagree with, and that's not the case. If we would get out of assumptions and get away from polls, and some of you might not agree, civility, right? We're not supposed to. That's what makes this democracy so amazing, and what makes this country so amazing, is that we can sit in a room and be different. The problem for me, and I'm kind of ambivalent to it, on one side I'm like, yes, civility matters, and we should be able to sit in a room and disagree. But when you have half a country who feels like they're not heard, they're not seen, and they're not cared for, I wonder what's actually going to cause real civility. Could it be a revolution? Hillary Clinton made she posed the difference between civility versus strength. She's saying Democrats want civility, but Republicans, they only respond to strength. I see that as well. But if we cannot sit in a room with our differences and talk about what were the obstacles, what have been the obstacles to progress, and how do we create grassroots spaces for people like me to come in and hold those spaces and have those deep conversations where we can make real change happen, people are going to continue to suffer in this nation, in my personal opinion. With that being said, we have to be real about what people are experiencing. I am clearly an African-American woman. When I walk into a room at 6 feet tall, even with social anxiety, people have preconceived notions about what I believe to be true. As a person of faith and minister, people make assumptions about what I believe to be true about the LGBTQIA community, and it's not real. I am a deep advocate for LGBTQIA and trans rights. But people make assumptions. But when I look across this room and I don't see not one person in here, not one, who looks like me, it bothers me. Because how can we have a conversation about civility and there has been no space to talk about equity? And I know some of y'all are like, shit, we got to talk about that again? You're goddamn right we do. And we have to, thank you. We have to keep talking about it until these rooms change, until your homes change. My question that I pose all the time in spaces like this, because I'm always in spaces like this. Let me be clear, I'm always the only black woman. And white women have said to me, I know what that feels like. I'm not laughing at you. Maybe a little bit I'm laughing at you. Now come on now, we gotta have thick skin. If we're going to have this real conversation about civility, we have to practice it, okay? But some white women say, I know what that feels like because I've been the only woman in the room. Say that again and see if that really makes sense. It doesn't. It doesn't make sense. We have to have honest conversations about what we believe to be true, and it doesn't demean what you believe to be true, and it doesn't negate what you believe to be true, but I'm able to sit in a space where I feel respected, heard, and then cared for. There's no basic compassion, no basic thoughtfulness anymore. Everybody wants to be right. Everybody wants to have power. Everybody wants to be in control. What my job is as an organizer is to shift the narrative on what power is. Because a lot of people believe that you're power, that you're power. Do you all see where I'm going? I'll just say it, that white men are power. That's not what power is. Do you all want to know what I believe power is? I'll just tell you. Everybody stand up quick. Come on, stand up. There's no trick. There's no trick. Now everybody sit down. That's power, the ability to simply do something. That's just what it is. It's your ability to do something. And that's what communities need. They want to know that there's a space for them to do something, to change their situation. Then you can talk about civility. But if you don't see me, we can't be civil. You have to see me. You have to hear me. You have to feel me. And yes, we're passionate because we're angry. If I'm telling you, I am so hungry, can you please go get me something to eat? You might go do a couple things, but if I get up and flip this goddamn table over and tell you I'm starving, you're going, okay, y'all, come on over here and get this girl some eggs and some sausage. We want to be heard. So I didn't mean to go off on a rant. Sorry, I got worked up.
Thank you, Desiree.
That was so cool.
Thanks, Desiree. Brian, why don't you add to a little bit to this conversation, but also talk about, really what's going on in D.C. in general as well, what you've perceived. So why don't you talk a little bit about civility, but then also put this little twist onto it coming from the other Washington.
The other Washington. So the dictionary defines civility as civil conduct, especially courtesy, politeness, a polite act or expression is the dictionary definition. And I think, as the previous two speakers have said, it goes much beyond that. It has to do with a demonstration of respect and understanding, a demonstration of respect and understanding for others, especially when we disagree. Especially when we disagree. And so how does that play out in the other Washington? It's challenging. It's challenging. I think in Washington, D.C., there's a level of incivility everywhere. It knows no political party. It knows no socioeconomic barrier or any other characteristic, but it exists pretty pervasively, and it can be crippling. And so it's extremely challenging. I think at the federal level, incivility seems like it might be at a peak, though if we put it into historical perspective, it really isn't. We have gone through tumultuous times, more tumultuous times, I dare say, than we are now. We went through a civil war. We went through civil rights. We went through Vietnam. We went through times where incivility was just as crippling as it is today, if not more so. I think increasingly in state capitals, we're seeing the levels of incivility increase. And maybe the last level of government where there is still civility as a norm is county government. And that's why I like working with NACO, because we really focus on not the left to right political, partisan spectrum, liberal, moderate, conservative. That's not our focus. And I don't think that's the focus of county governments. In about half the states, county officials don't even run on political affiliations. Our focus is not that right to left, left to right, horizontal. It's really the vertical of federal, state, and local. That vertical is our focus in the other Washington. We focus on co-sovereignty between states and the federal government. We focus on staving off unfunded mandates and underfunded mandates from the feds or the states on the county level. We focus on partnerships with our public sector partners and the private sector to deliver services for our residents. In short, we focus on the policy issues and the state federal, our nation's system of federalism, that vertical dynamic, rather than the left, center, right dynamic that so many others in the other Washington focus on. So civility, I think, is easy to define and difficult to practice, but you know it when you see it. And I think in the other Washington, we're doing our level best to practice it more frequently.
Great. Thanks, Brian. Commissioner Price Johnson, tell us a little bit about your view of civility, how it's practiced, but is it being overblown as well?
When I think about civility, I think as a mother of four, when my kids would come home from kindergarten, and Jim Sizemore reminded me of this, we all got that gets along well with others. We got rated on whether we could get along with each other and stand in line and perform the tasks that needed to be performed each day. And as a former Sunday school teacher, the golden rule is a very easy rule to understand. And it's something anybody of faith, or it's common to most religions, right? So probably all religions. I'm not a scholar of that, but what we fundamentally ask of the kids in our Sunday school classes and our kids in our kindergarten classes is what we should be asking of our leaders as well. We need to share power. This government was founded upon justice and freedom for all. That means that it isn't a zero-sum game. We have to be able to work together to be able to make things happen. And one of the things that I really admire about WASAC is that that's how we get things done at LSC and at the board of directors. You can't tell somebody's label on their, from their campaign literature when they're sitting at the table trying to address local government issues. And it's because we care deeply about and have pride of place and purpose. We care about our communities, and we want to serve our communities. And we share that across party lines, and where we can demonstrate that to our community members who might come in with torches blazing and pitchforks, and help them see that actually we see in you the same desire to have a healthy community and a healthy family and a future for this country. That's our power, and I think we need to claim it more loudly and more strongly, and at local government level, share that all the way up to the federal level. But it isn't just the politicians. I just think that we have a significant responsibility as elected officials to be more clear about our expectation of others and our expectation of our communities in coming together to address the disparities that we have. It isn't an either or. We need responsibility, and we need integrity, and we need freedom. And those are shared values that I think we can all agree with. We all want to have, I mean, if you want to have economic diversity in your community, you want to make sure that the environment is protected, because you can't exploit an unhealthy environment, right? So you have to be able to continue to maintain your natural resources. That isn't really a political issue across partisan lines. It's a political issue about coming together to solve problems. And that, I think, is something that local government is uniquely positioned to help be the messenger of.
Great, thank you. So I'm going to skip ahead from some of our questions. I think we got into some pretty substantive discussion. Is how do we assure then that we don't use the mask of civility as a way to tap down on views of those we disagree with, or as a way to bury disagreements, or a way to avoid the tough discussions, arguments, differences of opinions? Is how do we say, well, we're not being civil when we disagree, and that we somehow are creating this civility as a way to avoid really tough conversations that need to happen in the community? So who wants to start? Commissioner Price Johnson, go ahead.
Go ahead.
I believe a good gauge is to see how uncomfortable you are. If you're always talking to people who are telling you yes and telling you you're right, I think that's a good gauge to let you know you might be a little off. If you're a Democrat and you always listen to MSNBC, and you're a Republican, you always listen to Fox, you might be a little off. If you don't have this feeling in the gut of your stomach that something is wrong, that maybe you're missing the mark, you might be a little off. We have to get comfortable. I hate it when people have these cliches, but it's a real thing. We have to get comfortable with being uncomfortable. We have to immerse ourselves in spaces where people don't look like us, where we don't have shared values. Come to my church. Come worship with me. Who do you have? That's the point I wanted to get to during my opening, is who comes and eats at your table in your home? If being in spaces like this is okay for you, you might be a little off. If you haven't looked at this room today and said, my God in heaven, there's not one dark person, there's only one Negro, and don't call us Negroes. There's not one person of color, and I'm making an assumption because you appear to be not a person of color, so forgive me if you are a person of color and I overlooked you. I'm sorry, but you're not appearing to be from this stage with the light a person of color. But if you're okay in these spaces, then that lets me know who you have at your table, and you're also okay not having anybody of color or different from you in your home at your kitchen table. It's about who we eat with, who we share with. I stay around people who tell me no. I stay around people who challenge me and challenge my beliefs. Because sometimes it causes me to shift and be open. Sometimes it causes me to just serve the other, right? But sometimes it causes me to stand in what I believe to be true. And all of that is okay, because it doesn't take away from who I am as a woman. It ignites it. Does that make sense?
Dave Ammons, any perspective on are we using?
I really like what you just said. I know at my church we had a whole training, it was like 5 different nights, and all of us white people got together and talked about how to deal with difficult issues. It was primarily the gay inclusion issue at that point, and with people all over the map with that issue in our particular church. And so we had some role playing and some practicing listening, active listening and all of that, but just the point that our pastor was making is that you have to be civil, but you don't have to deny what your reality is. And so,
Or someone else's reality.
or someone else's reality. And that's hard for me because I've noticed on Facebook right now, I'm really having a tough time trying to be purple, which I try to be. I'm on the PDC. I'm not supposed to engage in campaigns or, you know, that sort of partisan stuff, which I couldn't do as an AP reporter either, or I try not to at the Secretary of State's office. So I've sort of not had my First Amendment rights for most of my adult life. But really, I think that I'm really wrestling, as I said, with my Facebook, where hateful things are said and crazy stuff is said. And I try to just say, oh, I really don't like that. I like talking to my peeps. And I think we are in silos. And I forgot how you said it, but we're in media silos. We listen only to the sources that we think, yeah, that's right. We don't listen to this other whole spectrum, and we're in media silos, as I say, and we're also in political silos. So I really like the idea of mixing it up and trying to be open to conversations. And I think that being civil doesn't mean not giving a rat's ass about issues, because the older I get, the more I care about what's going on in the country and the state and local, my hometown, county there in Thurston. So I'm struggling around my own behavior. I think of myself as a nice guy, sort of listening, validating everybody's experience, but I'm really kind of questioning if is that really me? So I'm opening myself up to where our church, speaking of which, is reading a book called Waking Up White, which is about white privilege and race and the fact that white people don't even think about the color of their skin. They don't even think about the power that is inherent in being white, and the privilege that comes to most of us just from that very fact, not to mention male privilege, which I think the whole Me Too movement really grabbed me good, as I started thinking about male privilege, male behavior. And so, yeah, I'm welcoming the uncomfortableness of where I'm at right now, but, and I think we can do it civilly if you get the meaning of just having an honest discussion and not having to prove anything to the other side or the other person opposite you in the conversation. So I'm a work in progress.
Great. Brian, your perspective on what that looks like, and are we masking the really hard discussions with under civility? We got to stay civil.
Right. This is not a new question. Are you all?
Well, not a new question.
Or an issue. I mean, it's really about the issue. It's not. Are you familiar with Jefferson dinners? Have you heard about the Jefferson dinners? Many communities now carry on the tradition of having Jefferson dinners. It's sort of a revitalization of the town hall where you bring divergent groups together and have a discussion around contentious issues. And everybody learns from one another. They may not walk away with their minds changed, but they at least listen to one another, and in some ways that's progress. But it started with Thomas Jefferson. In the early days of our country, lawmakers lived in regional boarding houses together. And they became very homogeneous in that structure. And then they would come to Washington, and they would caucus with those roommates, essentially. And President Jefferson sought to solve that. And things were becoming uncivil between the different housemates. And so President Jefferson would invite different groups from different living situations to the White House to have discussions around difficult issues. And after that, they were able to have more meaningful debates and discussions. They were able to listen to divergent points of view. And in that tradition, we do that today. So I don't think that we are shying away from difficult discussions because they're uncivil. I think the focus is, how do we convene diverse groups of people and promote civility at the same time?
I would like to add a postscript to that. I agree with the notion of getting more people in the room and talking civilly. In this state, the Democratic Party used to have a Jefferson-Jackson dinner to honor their most important volunteers and office holders. They don't do that anymore because both of those men were slaveholders, and it was very offensive.
Interesting. Helen Price Johnson.
Right?
So I think that the whole idea of civility and coming together is really important. And I think as local officials, we hold space for difficult conversations almost every week. If any public hearing that we hold, you're going to get divergent points of view. And I don't think that civility is devoid of passion at all. I think it's holding a space for that passion. I think where it gets most difficult is when we vilify each other for holding a position that might be contrary to mine. And if we can focus on the issue and not on the person, and trying to make it whether or not they're worthy because they hold an opinion or a stance that's different from the person that they're talking to, that's really where we lose it. I think civility is about being able to be very passionate and have conflicting views, but have it be about that thing and honoring the fact that each of us are human beings with families and loved ones and deep passions about life, and we're speaking and understand that we're speaking what we see to be reality. And I think each one of us in our own families or groups that we've been in, I struggle with that sometimes. My dander gets up. You push my big red button, and I start getting really excited about talking about what I think is important. And how can you possibly think that way? Except I need to make sure that I'm not making that somehow demeaning to the person, to the human being that's sitting there across from me, or the group of people that I'm talking about, because we have to come back to the humanity of each other. And I think if that's what I see as civility, is holding that space with all the other turmoil going on. Because we're not going to avoid controversy. We're not going to avoid seeing things differently. In fact, I would hate it if the world was made up of bobbleheads. So I just know that that's personally what I need to focus on when I'm struggling with my own attempt at being civil, is to remember, that you matter, and you have connections, and you have a history, and you're telling me what you know to be true, and my job is to be clear and honest and respectful of that.
It's a great follow-up. Hang on. Thank you. I think it's a great follow-up because the next question, or one of the questions, leads into that, which is, what are some of the ways that you individually or organizationally that you're a part of can improve or commit to improving civility? I mean, that's this element that I think we're ultimately after, is how do we now operationalize this? How do we take this and say, okay, personally, what can I do? Or organizationally, what can we do around improving or acting civilly? So do you want to expand any more on that, Commissioner Price Johnson? And then we'll kind of, no, okay. Brian, how about you? We'll work this way.
Sure. One of the great tools I think we have at our disposal to advance civility is civic education. There's a lack of understanding about what it means to be an engaged member of society. And part of that, I think, stems from a lack of understanding around what the roles of the public sector are. And so one of the things that NACO has focused on, really two things. We have a Counties Matter campaign, which aims to inform our public sector partners in the other Washington, private sector folks, the White House, Congress. What is the role of county government? You know, all these lawmakers come to D.C. and they don't have a clue what counties do. So we spend a lot of time educating them about the roles and responsibilities of county government, and we tie that to policy positions we aim to advance. And in that building of understanding about our role, advances the policy discussion. Once they understand that counties own and operate 9 out of every 10 jails across the country, when they talk about criminal justice reform, you better believe we're at the table. Once they understand those fundamental things about our roles and responsibilities. The other thing we have is we've partnered with an organization called iCivics, founded by Justice Sandra Day O'Connor, to develop some educational materials for school children. And we have available free of charge the County Solutions curriculum for junior high school students. We just launched one for high school students, states-aligned standards, and free to download lesson plans on civic engagement and the basics of county government. We just released an activity book for elementary students that takes them through the different things that county government does. Pleased to hear that that's having some traction here in Washington. There's a very popular online game called Counties Work, where students, and myself and adults included, go on and play this game, and they simulate the role of a county elected official, fielding requests, an unending stream of requests from citizens, while still balancing a budget and getting reelected. So it's a fun way to teach students the very basics about county government. And through that increased understanding, whether it's in the halls of Congress or the halls of public libraries, we certainly hope that an understanding of our role as the public sector can lead to civility and more civic engagement, productive civic engagement.
Great, thanks, Brian. So Desiree, your perspective on this whole piece of individually, organizationally, committing and improving civility, your perspective.
I think individually, what I was going to chime in and say is that we have to have those transformational experiences and sit with those tensions. And I think that lets us know, like I said, that we're on the right track. And we have to be very self-aware. So I kind of go back and forth between should we stay on the person or should we stay on the issues? I think staying on the issues causes us to make assumptions about the person and we stay completely polarized. But if we just get back in touch with a little compassion and think about the person. The other day, I was doing a ballot party in the 28th Legislative District, and one of the participants, when we were talking about the gun initiative, we were talking about the De-Escalate Washington initiative, he said, what coloreds don't understand is that, did you hear me? Okay, I'll say it again. So what coloreds don't understand is, and I was again the only African-American person in the room, he said, what coloreds don't understand is that police lives matter, right, too. And I said, you're absolutely right. And then I had to sit with the fact that this man just called me colored. And he went off on a rant, and then he says, you coloreds get so upset. This was just this past election. You coloreds don't get so worked up without hearing all of the facts when people get killed, right? And I was like, okay, you called me colored twice, all right, okay. And I had to sacrifice myself because I wanted to go straight south side of Chicago. Forget all of my degrees, forget my relationship with the Lord, and give him a piece of my mind. But what I chose to do in the spirit of civility was to greet him with some compassion. Let him know that, first of all, the other people in the room praised Jesus, stepped in and told him why, which is what you should do. Thank you for the slave comment. I encourage you to do. They stepped in and they said, well, let me tell you, yes, police lives matter, but let me tell you why Black lives matter right now. Praise the Lord. But then I had to say, well, don't call us coloreds. We don't do that. He said, well, I'm not a bigot. Well, you are if you call me colored, okay? You good? Okay. But what he did is he saw that I was hurt. So we got away from the issue and we got to the person. And he gave me this look like my dad used to give me, where when sometimes we let our children down, and this is the look of when my father knew he disappointed me. He just had this look like, and he just stared at me. And in that moment, I knew that he was sitting with attention and he was sitting with an experience. He had an encounter with himself where he realized that he was wrong because he hurt me. Believe what you want to believe, but you called me colored. And you told me that I didn't matter and that my people didn't matter. And more often than not, black folks are the ones getting killed. Your son doesn't worry about what happens at a traffic stop. My son is 4 and I have to teach him to respect authority. He's not having that conversation with his children. I am at 4. Okay, so that's the me. Organizationally, I believe what we need to do is organize. I'm an organizer, of course I think that. I have this dream that one day we have enough money where we don't trust the polls. Sorry, media folks, but we don't trust the polls. We say to hell with polls. Look what polls got us in. Sorry, Republicans. But look what polls did to us. Well, you should feel shitty too, because he's horrible. If you can't agree to that, then we can't have a conversation. But listen, let's just say to hell with polls, and let's knock every door in the hilltop, and let's knock every door in the east side, and let's meet people where they are at and give them the access to this great information. Because it's wonderful to say it in this room, but who in here represents people that look like me? Do you all go to black churches and go to black schools and let them know that this resource is available? Because the dividing line between oppression and privilege is access. It's just access. Access to the information, access to the education, access to the opportunities. We have to get away from assumptions. Assumptions are going to kill this country. We cannot make assumptions. We have to get back to the streets. The wonderful thing about Martin Luther King, and then I'm done. I swear I have social anxiety. I know you don't believe it, but I do. The wonderful thing about Martin Luther King is that people needed a leader and they needed vision. And he gave them vision. People were able to see it. They were able to see it. It was tangible. That's what having transformational experiences do. It causes you to sit, because I saw you go through it right here in front of us. You have these experiences where you begin to vision yourself being better. Envision how you create those spaces that you talk about creating on the island where people are diverse and they come together. You start to envision it, and then next thing you know, you're acting it out, right? And then people gravitate to it, and it becomes like a ripples to a wave effect. And then people get out there and they start knocking doors. People who've never knocked doors before, and they phone bank and they sign wave at 5 o'clock in the morning. Is Derek, are you still here, Derek Young? Derek, how many votes is Emily down? Emily ran. How many? 12 votes. There's still people who look like me who think their vote doesn't matter. 12 fucking votes. It matters. But the only way people know that they matter is if you knock their door and you give them the resources. Let me tell you how it matters. Emily Randall, your current senator, she's down 12 votes. That's why your vote matters. So that's my me, and that's my organizational.
I want to talk about media, if we can. I want to talk about the media and this distinction of what's happening in relationship to civility and the perspective that it is now having on the relationships with both the readers, relationships with elected officials. I want to start with Brian. You live in probably the area where this is most relevant at, but just can you talk a little bit about that a little bit more?
Certainly. I think with members of the media, I don't know that it's different now than it's ever been. We always try to be the best resource we can be with members of the media, but we have to remind ourselves that the media isn't the audience. It's the viewers and the listeners and the readers who are the audience. And so we may tweak our messages based on that. You know, we definitely need to do a better job of engaging the media. And I think if you come to my workshops this afternoon, or if you came to the one this morning, you'll get some tips on how to do that. But I think engaging the media is one thing, but remembering that the audience isn't necessarily the media, it's those listeners and viewers that are the important thing to remember when we're reaching out. But we're happy when they call on us to provide information because we are an accurate, reputable source of information. And so when they call on us, just like when they call on all of you, it is an opportunity to advance your position on whatever it is and to provide real facts, data, information, genuine, accurate information. And it's incumbent upon us to do that because that's how we communicate a message, through that vehicle of the media. And with social media, we can go directly to the public. We don't have to go through the filter of the media anymore, though the media still is an incredibly influential platform with an incredibly large audience. But we have all these tools at our disposal to go directly to the public, to work with the media, to communicate our message, and it's incumbent upon us to take that opportunity when it arises and to be proactive in creating those opportunities for us to advance a message.
So, Dave Almond, you spent most of your adult life dealing with the media issues. How does it interplay now with civility? How does the changing nature of how communication and media delivers or how people receive information deal with civility?
The media world is upside down right now. The business model for modern journalism is just about kaput. People aren't buying subscriptions to dead tree newspapers anymore, particularly if you're under 35. You want it on your tablet and you want it available 24/7 and you don't want to pay anything for it. That's not a great business model. And furthermore, it is traditional mainstream journalism has been conflated both by the president and by many people in the country, like 40% of the country, it's been conflated with social media. It's been conflated with special interest blogs, some of which are crazy, and it has been conflated with all manner of infotainment, I would call it. That none of the add-ons were a part of my world when I was a journalist. So it's very shocking, and it's also very shocking to have a president who denigrates the First Amendment and the free press every waking moment of his life, practically, and talks about fake news and talks about facts that he presents that are absolutely not true. The Washington Post keeps up with the misstatements and mischaracterizations or outright lies, and over 5,000 and counting right now. And the very notion of that we're in a post-fact era is shocking to me. I never thought I would live to see the day where provable fact and provable truth was not an American value. I'm just stunned by that and by how many people in this country are buying that line. I mean, the First Amendment to our United States Constitution included a free press as part of how government works at the state, local level, national level. And so I yearn for that sense of significance to a major American institution will return as hopefully public respect for all the institutions, be it church, be it schools, be it government, the field where you all do your labors. I think that media, I think the National Press Corps, I would say they have become part of the story. They've become part of the drama, and some of the White House reporters, some of whom I know are too privileged and uppity, and they don't know how the rest of the United States lives. So I have to say they're part of it, and there's also the notion that in promoting the things that come out of the administration, or by giving it the megaphone and printing the daily tweets and whatever it might be, that they become part of the problem. And I think about this a lot when what would I be like if I were a White House reporter? I was State House reporter here through 8 governors and many, many legislators through those decades, and political campaigns and elections. And I knew that I could ask questions and say them respectfully and get an answer. But if I were in the White House and from the podium I'm hearing stuff that's crazy, I probably would be asking impertinent questions myself, even though I'm this mild-mannered guy, because I think that's the role of the institution, to be the loyal opposition to a straight government perspective on things. So I think there's a little bit of shared blame there. But I think the press role in civility is pretty minor compared to all of the other players in this.
Great, thank you. I want to turn it open to the audience for questions. I don't know if we have microphones out there at all, Derek, or all. If you have a question, we've got about 10 minutes to see if there's any questions for the group or response. If there's anything. Got one over here, Chris Branch, Commissioner Branch from Okanogan County.
Well, I would submit that within our own institutions, we have to look within and start bringing up questions about the undertone that occurs there. And a few years ago, I went to a training on civility in City Hall, and it was about the culture that you create within an institution. And sometimes that's not talked about. And sometimes people will get away with actually saying things, sometimes in public, sometimes not, but they should be challenged. And so we create our own institutional culture. And sometimes I think we need to bring that out. I grew up around an Indian reservation. I was immersed, brought to a mission in Indian school, and left there, and I don't look very Indian, although I have Indian in me. And I learned that. I learned that as a kid, I didn't understand. And as time went on, today I reflect back on this and I go, oh, I see, there's all this conversation that was going on that I wasn't really aware of or didn't understand what it meant. And we have that in my county now. And so I take staff people and I challenge them on their views of the Indian people. And I found out that some of them didn't even think Indians get to vote. Most of my district is the Colville Indian Reservation. And that's very important to me. I grew up around there and I know the people. And so, again, institutionally, we have to make sure that the culture that we create is one that responds to the rest of the world in a positive way. So, thanks. That's just a comment.
Thank you. Commissioner Peck is back here.
So first, thanks, Commissioner Branch. That's a unique opportunity to have somebody his background to offer a comment like that. It's a perspective few of us have. Mine's in a different vein, and it has to do with what I perceive as a political pack mentality in D.C. politics, where self-interest, political preservation necessitates aligning with various leaders in each of the parties, and that dictates a lot of the behaviors, a lot of the language. And so my question is, do you think that as a disruptive force, as a guy who found himself mostly in the yellow block yesterday, as a disruptor, Do you think that term limits might serve to help reduce some of that pack mentality and be a way to begin to chip away at some of the incivility by giving people motivations to do the right thing as opposed to the political preservation thing?
Dave, I know you've thought of term limits.
I'm not a fan of term limits. I think they're artificial. I think voters have an opportunity to limit the terms of public officials, and they do. Actually, in Olympia, there is probably too much turnover, and that gives lobbyists and staffers from the agencies the real power in town. So I think natural turnover is good, but you definitely need some old hands who have tried and failed various things and can ward off the newcomers from going down roads they don't need to go down. So that's my point on term limits.
I mean, I can't, I don't want to speak on behalf of Fuse, but I think that, you know, in certain circumstances, it makes sense. I mean, when you think about, I think our port is great. I think the leadership that's on our port is great, but a lot of them have been sitting there since the 90s. And I think there's a lot of diverse leadership and new leadership, young leadership that can support the great work that our current port commissioners have done and take it to the next level and build off of the legacy that they've left. So I go back and forth, but again, I'm not speaking on behalf of Fuse. That's my own personal 2 cents.
I guess the rest of my answer would be that I think the party discipline, the caucus discipline has never been as strong as it is now. I think it grows out of the campaign cycle. And then when you go to Olympia, in the case that I'm familiar with, you stick with your tribe, and the other side of the aisle now is the enemy. The other house is really, you know, the other. But I think the more you can get around, move back, hopefully someday, to a more bipartisan approach to problem solving, the way I'm told you do at the county level, where it's not about getting ready for the next election. It's not about setting up votes that'll be gotchas in the next campaign ads. So I was in Olympia long enough. I was started in '71 as a rookie reporter, and I remember when Dan Evans was governor, and I remember when people from both parties got together and created the Women's Commission, created the Environmental Council together. They created the Department of Ecology. They created so much then because it didn't matter who was sponsoring it. They were about a vision of progressive leadership. So I've seen it happen. I've seen them put budgets together that you couldn't think possible, but they got everyone, particularly, we had some times where the House was equally divided. And those years were amazing because everybody had a seat at the table. There were co-chairs of the committees, there were 2 speakers. They had to agree on a path forward, and they had to really listen to everybody. So I dream for that day to come back, and that we'll get beyond toxic campaigns, and because that poisons Olympia. It poisons the ability to even talk with each other. I've seen people primaried because they worked with the other side. I really have, and so I think those are some of the answers is to create more personal relationships among the legislators, and hopefully not just stay in your own rigid boxes. I don't think that's good government.
I think at the national level, it's really more about corporate influence than it is about term limits. And I think the corporate influence, I mean, I talked about when I graduated from high school. I'm old enough to know and remember when there was a brick wall between news and entertainment. And that is gone now. And so it's very difficult to know